Hello, welcome again to Chile Talk. I'm Neil Davidson. I'm with Pete Lee on the end of a Zoom call. And following hard on the heels of our last little show about presidential candidates who are not actually running, though they could have done, or whatever, or disqualified or decided not to, we're now going to come to the ones that are running. Once again, it's going to be mainly Pete doing the talking because he knows about these things. And your idea, Pete, I believe, is to present the candidates roughly in order of least to most hopeful.
Yes. Well, one of the problems with Latin American elections is often there are a lot of candidates. We saw that in Peru. There was an enormous number of candidates. I believe as many as 11 made it to the initial round, which meant that the two leading candidates who ended up in the runoff didn't have much support base. And it led to a really line ball election, a white knuckle ride between whatever sort of coalitions these candidates could have put around them, despite the fact there's huge enmities within those coalitions.
Got it. And
Keiko Fujimori and Pedro Castillo, who's now the president.
And well, it's the same format in Chile, isn't it, as we touched on last time, which is a runoff between the two best placed candidates. And there aren't quite so many. There are, I believe, 7 candidates who are actually...
Yes, we've got 7. We've got 7. I mean, Chile is a country with just over 19 million people. Chileans don't know that. That's a secret. They'll often come up with numbers like 16, 17 or 18 million. But we do have 19 million people is the official estimate. And there's probably a few more. There's been quite a lot of immigration.
That's it. Just as a very brief aside, it is because of the amount of immigration, I suppose, that people have not been able to quite keep up. Similarly, in Britain, I had a vague idea that Britain's population was 63 million. I think last time I looked, it was about 68 or something. Actually, can that even be right? But yeah, I mean, its populations can rise very quickly. Chile, for many years, did not have much immigration, and in the last 5 years, it's had absolutely a tremendous, or let's say before the coronavirus, the 5 years, it had a huge amount.
Yes,
and Chile is quite generous about voting. You do get to vote in local and national elections once you've been resident, I think, for 2 years.
It's only 2 years.
Yeah. It's I had no idea. I became eligible and just assumed I wasn't, and somebody looked up my name on the fairly efficient online electoral register, and there I was. So yeah, that's right. So a lot of people have come onto the electoral roll fairly recently.
And the electoral roll has almost 15 million people on it. Some of those are dead, but there are 15 million people on the electoral roll. And as a general rule, we look at 7.5 million people voting in the first round. And
that's about 50%. That's just under.
And ideally over 6 million in the runoff election. There have been signs of a youth more interested in voting with the Constitutional Convention, and
but that was an interesting one, wasn't it? Because I mean, it wasn't a high turnout. I think the first round, I think on the question of principle, should there or should there not be a Constitutional Convention, it was about 50%, right? But
yeah, it was 7.5 million. So a very high turnout, a very respectable turnout
by Chilean standards.
Yes.
But for the actual candidates, who, of course, it was quite bewildering, wasn't it? Just this sheer, because it was not the established political parties.
Yes. 6 months later,
in it, but it was very bewildering. I remember my daughter, my 20-year-old daughter, and her friends, at least her friends, were very responsible, and they would actually nag her, have you studied the list of candidates yet? This became this was something very important for young people, for a lot of them. It really was felt as a seismic shift, and you did have people, really making an effort to understand who the candidates were, but it was quite difficult, wasn't it? And the actual final turnout was low. It was about 40%.
yeah, 41%, which is pretty. That's a worry. I mean, in terms of the quality of democracy.
For something that's going to change the whole face of the country for a very long time, that's a pretty weak mandate, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, surprisingly, the right-wing turnout was very low, and normally all around the world, right-wing votes vote.
Okay, I mean, we'll touch on this more, of course, when we go to the convention. But I think the right ran a very negative campaign, wasn't it? Essentially, like, we don't really want this, but give us enough votes to get a blocking minority. I think, wasn't that more or less
yes.
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 It's not exactly a call to arms, is it? Didn't really get the votes.
Yes.
A classic, a textbook should go into the textbooks as a piece of unsuccessful electioneering, really.
Yes, it's classic. But we can run through the candidates that we have. I mean, we have.
Yeah. So okay. Yes, the candidates. Let's see who they are.
We have a much lower number of no-hopers than in many elections, particularly in Latin America. There are often huge numbers of no-hoper candidates, but we have Eduardo Artes from the Patriotic Union. This is a kind of left-wing organization that associates with Salvador Allende. It doesn't seem to get much credit for that. Of course, Salvador Allende was a long time ago. But Eduardo Artes remembers the glory of the early 1970s. So he's running, and he's not going to win.
Right, you mentioned him first, so we're taking it. He's not going to do very well. Okay.
Yeah, he'd be lucky to get 4% of the vote. Next up, we have Franco Parisi, who's from the Party of the People, Partido de la Gente, which is
like the party of let's just call them the folk, the party of the folk, we could say that.
Party of the folk, yes. The Volkspartei. And he is a bit of a personality. He's got a somewhat coloured history. He's an economist. A lot of people in Chile are called economists, despite the fact that there is no training called economy at the undergraduate level. You study at a faculty of business and the economy, but you don't get a degree. You get a degree as a commercial engineer.
Which is a Chilean convention, isn't it?
Yes.
Head-scratching one for people who don't understand. But it basically means business studies, right? You've got to do business studies.
But when operating as a politician, commercial engineer will normally be described as an economist. And sometimes they will have postgraduate training in that. Franco Parisi does. He ran in 2013, got 10% of the vote, which is very respectable. The right was somewhat weakened by Sebastian Piñera's lack of popularity at the time. I'm not sure how he's going to go. We'll have to see.
Has he done anything to raise his profile since then, particularly?
Not anything good. He's had a few scandals, but that's sub judice. I mean, we don't need to contact. He's either loved or hated. I mean, he's sort of charismatic sort of figure.
Probably all publicity is good publicity, isn't it? As long as the scandal doesn't consist of kind of macroeconomic mismanagement or something. It was just some harmless sex scandal, The Chileans aren't too bothered about that kind of stuff.
Now, he's not going to win, but he might suck up, perhaps not 10%, but he might suck up towards 10% of the vote. And that has an effect on who gets those last two runoff places. He seems to appeal to as much to upper middle class as lower middle class people. It's a personality-based sort of position. Another figure who's very intriguing is Marco Enriquez Aminami.
Oh, is he running again? He keeps turning up, doesn't he? Like a bad penny.
He's equaling Salvador Allende's record of 4 presidential campaigns. In the end,
Salvador Allende got in the 4th time, so
yes, didn't get a chance to run a 5th time. But Mayo, as Marco Enrique Aminami, is known as a very interesting character with a very storied political history, very storied family. He appeals to, I guess, somewhat hip people. He has a little bit of proletarian appeal and a little bit of university graduate appeal.
And what is his main point? What are his main selling points? What's his sort of platform, very briefly?
Oh, sort of general progressive piety. You know, I mean, you don't want to pick over the bones too closely, but he's there. He's a figure. He stands for a slightly left-leaning centrism. Quite similar to Salvador Allende in that sense, you know. Similar to Allende, he's very dignified, and similar to Allende, he's not prepared to become president. So the first time he ran, which must have been early 2000s, might have even been 99, I'm not sure. He got 1.3 million votes, which is a very respectable number.
Absolutely. If
you get over 2 million, you'd be unlucky not to make it through to the runoff. So that's a considerable vote. That's been falling. I think the last time he ran, he got 700,000. So that's less significant. But if we do have these characters such as Parisi and Mayo sucking up, say, 2.5 million votes between them, it starts to have an effect on the way things work, particularly in their cases with respect to the possibility of positioning yourself as a centrist and attracting the votes that they've received in the runoff. We have another character.
You're not writing Mayo off then? You think he might slip? He could just slip through the middle there?
No, I don't think he can, but he can suck up enough votes to do damage in the dynamics of the runoff election.
Got it.
And also in determining who comes second and who comes third, and possibly who comes first. Obviously, only 1 and 2 get through. Now, another candidate who's not going to win, but promises to get around 10% of the vote, is Jose Antonio Cast, who we've mentioned before on Chile Talk. He's the youngest son of, I want to say this in Bavarian correctly, I believe it would be Michael Cast in Bavarian. I don't think we'd go as far as Michel Cast in Bavarian. We'll have to look that up.
Yeah, we should have prepped for this one. I can't really help.
We don't know. You have better German than me. But Michael Cast was a former SS officer who was brought to Chile in the beginning of the 1950s, had many sons and daughters, including an outstanding economist called Miguel Cast, his eldest son, and his youngest son, who is Jose Antonio Cast. He was a deputy, and he is a hard right figure. He's tried to position himself a little bit like Bolsonaro. Actually, he's a perfectly pleasant sort of character, but he's manages to become a figure of hate. He follows Bolsonaro in making no apologies for the military government.
And of course, Miguel Cast was a Chicago boy, wasn't he? He was one of Pinochet's economists and very prominent, real leading light.
Yeah, died very young, contracted cancer and died in 1984, I think, when he was about 35 or 36.
That's right.
And
he was also
his youngest.
So contradictory. He was also, sorry, I shouldn't linger too long on Miguel Cast, but he was a big Catholic, wasn't he? Very sort of moral.
Yes.
And so with this really enormous blind spot for what was going on in the dictatorship. Very, very interesting, some of these characters.
Yes.
So is the latest Cast also a kind of Catholic?
Well, yes. I mean, I think the Casts in general came out of the democratic Christian movement, which of course had its golden time in the mid to late 1960s, when they were the Chilean Kennedys, the sort of Chilean Kennedy proxies, Eduardo Frei Montalva. who wasn't charismatic, but somehow was projected as that kind of figure. Such figures were supported throughout Latin America by the United States. And the Cast family in general became disenfranchised by and unimpressed by the democratic Christian experience, and became instrumental in the formation of what we call gremialism, the Independent Democratic Union, UDI.
That's right.
Which was the party you have when you're not having a party, because political parties were banned for most of the military government of Augusto Pinochet. But UDI was, the gremialist movement was recognized as the political party doing much of the civic thinking and appealing to the military-minded people as well.
That's right, because the military government was itself gremialist in its beginnings before it sort of veered much more to the free market. Okay, so that's Cast. And so who's next? Cast is doing quite well. So Cast is quite popular. He's got a big support base.
Cast got popularity, and he has seceded from the UDI. He considers the UDI to be pushing too far to the centre. The UDI is a very Catholic party. Has a little bit of appeal with what we call evangelicals, people who follow Protestant denominations, sort of tambourine playing Protestantism.
This does give it quite a working class base, doesn't it? Because evangelicalism is very working class in Chile and in Latin America.
As well as the Chilean military family is very Catholic historically, and that ranges from upper class military people to people who always enjoyed being conscripted and so on in the army and Navy and Air Force. So Cast has formed a party called the Republican Party, and he also has the support of an evangelical Christian movement, mostly evangelical Christian, also some charismatic Catholics in there. So he basically has a lot of the very socially conservative vote. Interesting character. UDI did not get its candidate to the final round, didn't get it through the Chile Vamos
primary.
So
Chile Vamos, just to explain, Chile Vamos being the umbrella group, of course, for the centre right, which Piñera is his party. So it's the UDI and it's the
Renovación Nacional
and some
Yes. Yeah, so they don't have a candidate. So Cast might suck up some of those UDI votes and may well reconstitute some other movement around his cult. Very interesting guy. And next, we have 3 candidates left. The first one isn't going to win either, I don't think, but could just sneak in. We're not sure. And that's Yazna Pravaste. Yazna Pravaste, she's associated with the north of Chile, various cities in the north, I believe. She's of Dieguita descent. She's a woman. She's the only woman left. That may well garner a few votes. The Indigenous connection, she'll play that as hard as she can.
I mean, that's interesting as well because, there's a feeling sometimes, well, I think perhaps all the time, that the Mapuches really monopolize the whole Indigenous thing, simply because they're the vast majority of Indigenous people. The other ethnicities are very small, aren't they? Ranging from like 30 people in the case of the sort of Yagan, I suppose. Sorry, who are the ones who now mainly live off that island off the west coast of Chile?
The Cahuesca.
The Cahuesca.
Yes,
that's right. Very, very small, ranging to a few thousand, I suppose, kind of Aymara in the north, maybe, but
more. If we wanted to count the Quechua and the Aymara carefully, we'd actually count all the Peruvians who are in all of the cities.
Very
And
true.
there would probably be more of them than people inscribed as Mapuche. But the indigenous peoples, as we call them, the original peoples, it's a matter of identification.
Yes.
You would inscribe with the group. It's based on the Canadian system of enrolling people within an ethnicity. Obviously, 99.9% of Chileans are of indigenous descent and Spanish descent.
It's also a self-identification, but anyway, it's on that basis, then Mapuche far outnumber the others, and I believe there's a little bit of resentment, in fact.
Oh, there may be.
Yeah.
Dear Gita definitely sounds. It's a good brand. It's a good brand. It sounds.
It's the harmless indigenous people, isn't it? Yeah, there aren't many of them, and they don't do anything militant that one ever hears about anyway. They don't sort of burn laurels or anything like that.
And they're in mining territory as well, so you could play a bit of Pachamama stuff, which of course doesn't come from their culture, but I'm sure they have an equivalent. And she doesn't play that too heavily, but she's clearly of indigenous descent, as opposed to the other candidates, which is somewhat attractive. But what she lacks is charisma. She's not been able to project a charismatic front. And she has the candidacy of the old Concertación, the old centre-left group, what's left of it, the Socialist Party. She's from the Democratic Christian Party, but she's way to the left of the Democratic Christian Party. She was the president of the Senate. She's just stepped down from that to run as president. And she was behind basically allowing people to take out their superannuation money 3 times during the pandemia, which made her wildly popular because people love getting money. They probably feel that they're getting money from the government by doing that. So teaching Chileans about what superannuation is has not been successfully achieved over the last 35 years.
And possibly they feel that the pensions they were going to get were so miserable anyway, they might as well, live now, really. So perhaps there's a kind of what seems this kind of like fecklessness there might actually be an underlying wisdom there.
Yes, yeah, there may be something to it. But anyway, she has not been able to leverage that to take the centre ground. And part of the reason for that is the 2 leading candidates who are probably going to make the final runoff round, but may not. There are still unforced errors and own goals to be had, are fairly close to the centre, at least in their demeanours and in the noises they make. One of them is Gabriel Boric, who comes from the far south of Chile. Boric being a Dalmatian name. We call them Croatians now. They've been called various things throughout Chilean history, but they all came from Dalmatia.
They all came from the same island, in fact, called Brač, which was part of the Venetian Empire, the Venetian Republic. At one point, it was called it's called the Republic of Ragusa. That's right. And practically all the Dalmatians in Chile come from this one small island, and a lot of them went to the far south. That's right, to Punta Arenas.
Yes, so that's very credible to be from there. It's a romantic idea, and it's a very independent style of person. And he's a very independent lone wolf style person who's come through the Frente Amplio movement, the student politics movement. He was a law student. He never graduated, I believe, from Universidad de Chile. Not terribly academic, but he seems to be a kind of principled guy. He seems to have steered through all the political flack that has been available over the last 10 years as a basically professional politician, and is still seen as something of an outsider and somewhat principled.
So essentially fairly left-wing, Frente Amplio. Obviously,
but not as far as the Communist Party, who they're running with. And he resoundingly defeated Daniel Hawe from the Communist Party. I think he got 1.7 million votes or something like that. Can that be right? It might be 170,000. I don't know. Sometimes I get the numbers wrong. Sometimes I get here in South America, sometimes we take digits off things. That happens sometimes, particularly in Venezuela.
I'm sure we'll append a note to this episode, won't we? Giving the true figure.
But he got resoundingly more than the communist candidate, who's a very, very big and very left-leaning populist. So Boric made very reasonable noises about distancing himself from the project in Venezuela, for example, and Cuba, which is quite smart because that brings him closer to the center and brings his movement closer to the center. There might be some votes in that.
Yes.
So we'll
otherwise, if you go along with the Venezuelan project, you're unelectable essentially. So
yes, I don't think there'd be too many electable. I mean, in Argentina it's possible, but Argentina has a very advanced political system. Anything's possible there. But here in Chile, the center is where the election is going to be run. That's where the people are going to vote. We have a country where everybody identifies as of the middle class. So making centrist noises is usually associated with middle class respectability.
That's right. Aspiration does go down well in Chile, doesn't it? I suppose perhaps if only for the reason that if anybody made enormous promises about, the state looking after everybody, they just probably wouldn't be believed, I suppose.
Well, we've got the Constitutional Convention doing that at the moment, and it's steadily causing more and more problems there.
That's right. That's a huge and very interesting topic,
which we'll get to. But we have another candidate who's
very
exciting as well.
Mm-hmm.
Another interesting candidate called Sebastian Sitchell. Now, Sebastian Sitchell served in the current Piñera government as Minister for Social Development, which is the soft soap job, the easiest job where you're giving out the bonuses to people, and it's the easy job, basically, in the way patronage culture works in Chile at the moment. And he's young. He's, I believe, 45, might be 44. And Sebastian Sitchell is, a solid guy, comes from, I don't want to sound like I'm selling Sebastian Sitchell, because I like all of these candidates, but he comes from a very middle-class background. His parents were sort of heroically troubled, a bit of alcohol and drug abuse.
Okay, I was going to ask, middle class in the kind of West European sense, or middle class in the Chilean sense? In
the Chilean sense, yes. Sense, yeah. And he somehow dragged himself up from the bootstraps and got into law at Universidad Católica and became the protege of various political figures. I think beginning in the Christian Democrat movement, moving towards the right, as the Christian Democrat movement lost gravity or gravitas. And he seems like a capable person, reasonable person, can speak, but nonetheless, his great disadvantage is he's going to be opposed as the continuation of Piñera. So he has to differentiate himself. Not just him, but also his backers, which is much of the empresarial community, the business community. So we'll have to see how he sells at the retail politics level, but it seems to be reasonably solid, and he has the advantage also of counting on the votes from Jose Antonio Cast when Jose Antonio Cast is knocked out in the first round. All of those people will vote against the more leftist candidate.
That's right. Yeah, because there is a perception, which is perfectly sound actually in Chile, that kind of big business is kind of cronyistic, sort of lots of cartels, which is actually true. Chile is a very expensive country. clearly, you know, it's a kind of license to print money, really, business. So to be too associated with that class perhaps isn't
yeah,
really
and he certainly hides it well, but that's where the funding's coming from. Both Boric, the Frente Amplio candidate, the youth candidate, and Sitchell, the youth candidate of the right, have terrible tattoos on their forearms, and they're not afraid to show it. Now, I often wonder what that means. They'll have their autobiography or their positioning piece showing their terrible tattoo, and I'm not quite sure how to interpret it. I don't know whether it means I was young once, I'm still young, I've got one too. Don't be ashamed to have a tattoo.
Yeah, I suppose it's all that. I suppose it's all that. It's I'm not sort of, you know, all sort of stuck up, whatever. I'm a man of the people. Yeah, I can see that.
The new generation. I mean, the Generation X, Chile didn't really have a Generation X because didn't have the, you know, 1970s, 1980s style childhoods that we associate with Generation X in the North Atlantic countries or Australia. But that age cohort, which is not small, never made it in politics. It's one of these cases where sometimes a generation is skipped. Something similar happened, I guess, in Britain with Tony Blair coming in quite young, or Obama coming in young, Clinton coming in youngish. Sometimes that happens. You end up having a lot of presidents from one background in terms of the age cohort and none from the other. And there's a lot of people aged, say, 50 to 65 who've had political ambitions but could never find a place in the Star Chamber. Or they got into the Star Chamber, but they didn't make it into the throne.
I see. Got it. And just I guess we're wrapping this episode up now. You've covered all the candidates. I mean, there's this big mystery. It certainly looks like a mystery at first sight, which is that to look at the composition of the Constitutional Convention, you would say that Chileans have suddenly woken up to the fact that they can be left-wing and vote themselves bounty, and they've suddenly become all woke, whatever. You know, it seems like a seismic shift. That suddenly, it felt, just looking at it from the outside, which is where I'm now looking at it from, as though a wall had suddenly collapsed and the country we thought existed was actually quite different. But now you seem to be saying the presidential elections are business as usual, really. You know, it's going to be centre-left, centre-right candidates going to win.
Yes, I mean, it's fallen back into place. There's a sense of an incredible religious sincerity about the social splintering, a sense of getting together and doing something together, holding candles in the park, not criticising the vandals and so on, that obviously there's no organised religion capable of, or organised civil religion capable of steering that with any fine filigree. But the political machinery has found a way to reinvent itself and get control of the system steadily. And I believe the saving grace of Chile is that some degree of order, you know, the notoriously true motto of Chile at some points has been by reason or by force, in that order. In this case, the reason was tried, the force could not be used because in Chile today, you know, you can't beat up too hard on the kids. So the reason had to be tried again, and I think any kind of truly progressive sentiments have been outthought once again, and we have some youthful mummies, we might say, some youthful dinosaurs falling into place in Boric and in Sitchell.
Mm-hmm. Well, meanwhile, the Constitutional Convention, whose composition is now set in stone, ploughs its path and is going to produce some kind of constitution, which is then going to have to be put to a plebiscite. This is what we're going to be dealing with, I think, in our next episode, or very shortly. Until then, oh, by the way, just on a little aside, my mind was playing on this word folk, and you then put it into German, the Volkspartei. I suppose actually that's the difference. Gente is the English folk, and pueblo is the German folk.
Ah.
How about that?
Oh, that's very nice indeed.
Folk and folk.
Nice
so there we are on that erudite note. I guess we should wrap this one up and see you next time. I hope you will join us on Silly Talk.
I'll have to ask you the difference between Sussex and Suffolk sometime.
Oh, sure. Yeah. You will receive a fulsome answer. Okay. Thank you for joining us, and see you next time.
Many thanks. Thank you.